Hello, everyone. Today we are doing lesson 33. There is another way of looking at the world, and chapter 4 text, The Illusions of the Ego, section 2, The Ego and False Autonomy. Let's begin. Section 2, The Ego and False Autonomy. It is reasonable to ask how the mind could ever have made the ego. In fact, it is the best question you could ask. There is, however, no point in giving an answer in terms of the past because the past does not matter. And history would not exist if the same errors were not being repeated in the present. Abstract thought applies to knowledge because knowledge is completely impersonal, and examples are irrelevant to its understanding. Perception, however, is always specific and therefore quite concrete.
Everyone makes an ego or a self for himself, which is subject to enormous variation because of its instability. He also makes an ego for everyone else he perceives, which is equally variable. Their interaction is a process that alters both, because they were not made by or with the unalterable. It is important to realize that this alteration can and does occur as readily when the interaction takes place in the mind as when it involves physical interaction. There could be no better example that the ego is only an idea and not a fact.
I'm reading something a little different here.
Why don't you read what you have?
Okay.
Read the whole paragraph.
Well, it's like there's one word that's changed out in one sentence that doesn't seem to be there.
Read the whole paragraph.
Okay. Everyone makes an ego or a self for himself, which is subject to enormous variation because of its instability. He also makes an ego for everyone else he perceives, which is equally variable. Their interaction is a process that alters both, because they were not made by or with the unalterable. It is important to realize that this alteration can and does occur as readily when the interaction takes place in the mind as when it involves physical proximity. Thinking about another ego is as effective in changing relative perception as is physical interaction. There could be no better example that the ego is only an idea and not a fact.
So that's an interesting thing, and it shows the difference between the FIP version and the Urtext.
Yeah.
So in the second to last sentence that I have is the word interaction, and the word that you have is
Proximity.
And then there's a whole sentence that has been added. Read that sentence again.
Thinking about another ego is as effective in changing relative perception as is physical interaction. Now, what I take that particular sentence to mean is when I am looking out on my brothers and seeing the things they are doing and saying and expressing, I can see how it is that they are within their ego minds in those moments. So I can actually look at them and recognize that they are not in their right-minded thinking by perceiving their ego as it is in that moment. And what I get from that is in being able to look at it and see it without judging it, just recognizing what it is that they're doing. It allows me to see, one, where my mind has been changed perceptually, to recognize the difference, which is something that I have had happen to me continuously within the last 2 years. Recognizing when my brothers are in an egoic moment, in an egoic thought pattern with judgments and opinions and angst and so forth like that, even with my husband. And he has taken to getting very frustrated with me when I'm like, honey, that's like an ego thought system there. He's like, oh, I'm tired of hearing about the ego. But I mean, it's what I'm seeing, it's what I'm being shown in those moments. And I find it a lot of times with things that are being put out there on the internet too. The, what are they called? Memes, whatever they are.
Mimes, whatever.
Yeah, those pictures with all the words on them and the cute pictures in the background of them. Like there was one talking about what you say and what you do is, can hurt other people and cause them harm. You need to be aware of what you're saying and doing. It's not all about you. Something of that nature. And teach your children to be careful of what they say to other people, and that anything they say can be really hurtful and harmful. And that kind of judgment of teaching a child to be politically correct and not express themselves, I found to be very twisted. It reminded me very much of the things that I went through as a child, being told just because it happened to you doesn't mean you need to talk about it. And that I was responsible for being picked on at school, being bullied, that I was responsible for that. And those kinds of things used to drive me nuts. There were instances as a child where I had to really step back and think about the things that were being said to me and done to me. And I had to start shutting down the gifts I had been given so I could stop feeling like I was going crazy. The understanding someone's intent and what they were really saying when they said something and being told I was imagining it. It's like it was a mind screw. Everything that I would say was happening or was going to happen came true. And every time I was told I was wrong, I was imagining it, I was making it up. And then when it happened, I would get the shit beat out of me for not staying away from them if I knew it was going to happen. What the hell is a person supposed to do when they are stuck there for that person to babysit them? That's the kind of stuff that I ran into. Convoluted thinking of, oh, she's a child, but she should have known better and stayed away from the babysitter if she knew that the babysitter was going to rape her. Why would you put the child there in the first place? Those were the questions that came to my mind as an adult. Not so much as a child, I just couldn't understand why was I being punished for what somebody else was doing. And so it taught me to believe that I was doing wrong. And now, when I look at those things, I recognize the misperceptions they had, the misperceptions I had, and their egoic thinking in those moments. And as each day plays out, I see the egoic thinking of those around me who haven't stopped to question what it is they're thinking and believing. And so that particular sentence in there is right on the mark when it tells us that in observing the egos around us, we can see the truth of where our brothers are at. And it's those interactions that open our eyes to the own things that we are believing in and putting forth as being true. Let's continue on with 3. Your own state of mind is a good example of how the ego was made. When you threw knowledge away, it is as if you never had it. This is so apparent that one need only recognize it to see that it does happen. If this occurs in the present, why is it surprising that it occurred in the past? Surprise is a reasonable response to the unfamiliar, though hardly to something that occurs with such persistence. But do not forget that the mind need not work that way, even though it does work that way now.
Think of the love of animals for their offspring and the need they feel to protect them. That is because they regard them as part of themselves. No one dismisses something he considers part of himself. You react to your ego much as God does to his creations, with love, protection, and charity. Your reactions to the self you made are not surprising. In fact, they resemble in many ways how you will one day react to your real creations, which are as timeless as you are. The question is not how you respond to the ego, but what you believe you are. Belief is an ego function, and as long as your origin is open to belief, you are regarding it from an ego viewpoint. When teaching is no longer necessary, you will merely know God. Belief that there is another way of perceiving is the loftiest idea of which ego thinking is capable. That is because it contains a hint of recognition that the ego is not the self.
Well, consider, folks, for those of you that have pets or children, nieces and nephews, for most of you, you will find that you have an emotional bond with that other being, whether it's a child, whether it's an animal, and that in many ways you see them as an extension of you, as part of your family. In many ways, a mother will look at you and recognize that their child is a part of them. That child came from them, so they see that child as being part of their flesh, part of their blood. And it takes a long time for a parent, a mother, to disassociate themselves from the idea that that child is part of them and not their own being. It takes a very long time. I know that for me, my son was probably about 14 before I started to recognize that he was his own being with his own choices and decisions to make. But until that time, I still saw him as my little boy, as part of me. And in that same way, I recognize that I am my own being and I am not an extension of my mother, as I used to look at my son as being an extension of me. And the amount of protectiveness and love I felt for my child, I exuded outward. And I would sometimes be very controlling in some ways. And people would be like, geez, he's just a kid, let him play. And I was like, no, he's not just a kid. He is going to be out there in society someday. Someday it could be my son with the gun, getting gunned down, doing drugs or whatever. And ironically, my son is carrying a gun these days. He's in the Army. But that was, one of the things that I was looking at when I was raising him. I wanted to raise my child to uphold the law, to help his fellow man, and to be loving and compassionate to those around him. To not look at them as a source of income, not connect with people only for what he could get from them. And that's how a lot of our children are being raised today, is to look at people as a resource, not as the human beings they are. It's like when you look at me, I'm not a dollar sign. I'm not a sex symbol. I'm not a political party. I'm not a race. I'm not a religion. I'm a human being. I bleed just as much as anyone else. And that is part and parcel of seeing ourselves as equals with our brothers. As we let go of these beliefs, we stop reacting in egoic ways. And as we stop doing so, as we start recognizing the egoic tendencies in those around us, we see it, we witness it, and we step back and we look at it. We ask, what is it that I'm perceiving here? And when we do so, we are shown the truth. And in doing that, we then find ourselves not reacting in an egoic way to the things that we are perceiving. We stay at peace, we stay centered. And that's what that's talking about. All right, let's move on. Undermining the ego's thought system must be perceived as painful, even though this is anything but true. Babies scream in rage if you take away a knife or scissors, although they may well harm themselves if you do not. In this sense, you are still a baby. You have no sense of real self-preservation and are likely to decide that you need precisely what would hurt you most. Yet, whether or not you recognize it now, you have agreed to cooperate in the effort to become both harmless and helpful, attributes that must go together. Your attitudes, even toward this, are necessarily conflicted because all attitudes are ego-based. This will not last. Be patient a while and remember that the outcome is as certain as God. So, it's kind of like Alex and I have been talking about in some of these lessons, have basically been pointing out that we don't know what anything is for, and we don't know what's in our best interests. And because of that, we can't know what's in anyone else's best interests either. And that is when we have to recognize that we have no say in any of it. And when we get upset, it's because we are having ego thoughts coming through our minds in those moments, telling us that we should do this, should do that, or it should be this way, or it should be that way, or we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that, or it shouldn't have gone that way, and it shouldn't go this way, it should go this way only. This one way that I want it to go. Doesn't work that way. We have to leave go and trust that everything is for our benefit. And look within at it with Holy Spirit and ask Him what it is He would have you do. What is it that He would have you see in this situation? What are you misperceiving in the situation? How can you experience this differently? What are you missing? Alex?
Only those who have a real and lasting sense of abundance can be truly charitable. This is obvious when you consider what is involved. To the ego, to give anything implies that you will have to do without it. When you associate giving with sacrifice, you give only because you believe that you are somehow getting something better and can therefore do without the thing you give. Giving to get is an inescapable law of the ego, which always evaluates itself in relation to other egos. It is therefore continually preoccupied with the belief in scarcity that gave rise to it. Its whole perception of other egos as real is only an attempt to convince itself that it is real. Self-esteem is always vulnerable to stress, a term which refers to any perceived threat to the ego's existence.
Another missing sentence.
Go ahead.
So let's go back to sentence 5 where it says giving to get. So giving to get is an inescapable law of the ego, which always evaluates itself in relation to other egos. It is therefore continually preoccupied with the belief in scarcity that gave rise to it. Its whole perception of other egos as real is only an attempt to convince itself that it is real. Self-esteem, in ego terms, means nothing more than that the ego has deluded itself into accepting its reality and is therefore temporarily less predatory. This self-esteem is always vulnerable to stress, a term which refers to any perceived threat to the ego's existence.
It kind of concerns me because I heard that sentences and words were removed out of the FIP version. I'm wondering, this is twice now that sentences have been added. Who added those sentences?
Yeah, it makes you wonder, but it gives more context to what's being said.
Right, but if it wasn't Jesus that added those sentences, was it Ken Wapnick?
Or it could have been an afterthought by Helen.
These were all channeled
I know.
writings from Helen, so an afterthought?
Or it could have been something in her original notes.
Yeah. Well, it'd be good to look that up. I'm actually glad we're seeing the differences because I remember when I first did the course, I was following somebody who did YouTube ACIM lessons, and there would be differences. And I was reading right out of the FIP version, but she was reading out of an older FIP version. So, that makes me wonder, who's doing these editing?
Yeah. And this is part of the reason why I keep saying that in the sharing of the stuff that he has me share my experiences. Not something I've read from this book. Not something I read from a different book. Not something I heard somebody say. He has me share from my personal experience to place on point the lesson being taught, to put it into context, real life, real world context of things that many people have gone through. And in that way, it helps others to see it differently, to see a light at the end of that tunnel. So yeah, that was interesting that sentence. And in this book here, it's sentence number 8 says, self-esteem in ego terms means nothing more than that the ego has deluded itself into accepting its reality and is therefore temporarily less predatory.
And the sentence I have here, which is the last sentence of that paragraph, says,
Mm-hmm.
self-esteem is always vulnerable to stress, a term which refers to any perceived threat to the ego's existence.
Exactly.
And it puts self-esteem in quotes there.
Yeah. Now, self-esteem, folks, think about it. You sit there and ask folks, how do I look? Does this make my butt look big? Does this make me look fat? Like, how's this color on me? Does it make me look sallow? What do you think of this? Does this smell okay on me? How's my hair look? Is my makeup okay? Is everything even? We ask people these questions. And if they say the smallest thing that says that something's wrong, something's off, we take a blow to our self-esteem, to who we think and believe we are, at what defines us. Now consider that a moment, folks. You are believing in someone else's judgment and opinion as defining who you are.
By the way, I
Yeah.
just looked up the definition of self-esteem from Wikipedia. And it says, in sociology and psychology, self-esteem reflects a person's overall subjective emotional evaluation of his or her own worth.
Mm-hmm.
It is a judgment of oneself as well as an attitude towards the self.
Yep. Exactly. And what was I just talking about? Accepting others' judgments as defining who you are. Because when you accept them, you enact them on yourself. Devaluing yourself based on somebody else's thoughts and opinions and someone else's judgments. You take that blow straight to the heart, and guess what? You're doing it to yourself. And that is part of what it's talking about. I think he's having a nightmare.
No, the neighbor locked their car.
Oh, I didn't
The
hear it.
same kind of car that your mother has, the same horn.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So back to self-esteem. Um, Recognizing the things that you are defining yourself as being. A good wife, a good husband, a good cook, a good lover, a good mom, a good dad, good overall parent, a good son, a good daughter. What exactly are those things? It's somebody else's definition of what they think you should be. Whether it's family, friends, peers, society in general. This is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. We have friends that are living in another state, and they're being told by their kids' school that their children are horrible and horribly raised, and that they're at fault for it. And, that maybe their children need to be committed to an insane asylum or something like that. And it's like, these people are passing judgments without knowing the parents, without knowing the children, not paying any attention to what the child is telling them, that they're being bullied. It's like, when do we stop accepting the judgments and opinions of others as being valid and being true? Because they're all lies based off of their own fears and insecurities. In truth, it's what they think and believe about themselves. I guess we are ready to move on to 7. The ego literally lives by comparison. Equality is beyond its grasp, and charity becomes impossible. The ego never gives out of abundance because it was made as a substitute for it. That is why the concept of getting arose in the ego's thought system. Appetites are getting mechanisms representing the ego's need to confirm itself. This is as true of body appetites as it is of the so-called higher ego needs. Body appetites are not physical in origin. The ego regards the body as its home and tries to satisfy itself through the body. But the idea that this is possible is a decision of the mind, which has become completely confused about what is really possible. So, what it's talking about there, folks, is that the only time we want to give to someone else is when we think we're going to be able to get something back from them. We have been taught to look at everyone around us as a resource. Let's connect on Facebook. Let's connect on Twitter. Let's connect on LinkedIn. Let's connect on MySpace. Let's connect on, you see a pattern happening there? Let's network. Those kinds of things are one and the same. They are looking to link you up with other people as a resource. Not because they care about you. It's because of what they think they can get from you. And then sometimes you get people that want to link up with you so that they can try and teach you what they think you should be doing. And that are some of the things that it's talking about there. When we look at others, we're not giving out of a sense of helping to be charitable. We are looking at it as a resource to get something back. It's like giving out of charity is giving even when you have little to give. That's being charitable. Even when you only have $5 and you turn around, split it in half and give somebody else $2.50 because you want them to be able to get a cheeseburger too. Guess what? That is charitable. You have little, but you gave enough to let somebody else get something equal to what you're getting in that moment, without a thought of getting anything in return from it, not even a thank you.
You know, something's really standing out to me in the first sentence here, that paragraph. It says the ego literally lives by comparisons. We were having a conversation today as I was driving home from work, and I was sharing with you how I'm constantly worrying about money and and our financial situation, being able to pay the bills and such, and how I see that other people and businesses are struggling also, so I can give myself a break. And so I'm comparing myself with the other businesses, the other people that are struggling and not doing well, and saying, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm not doing so bad then. But I'm just simply comparing myself with others.
Exactly. And, you know, there was another thing that came up in regards to these videos. And something that has stood out to me is an understanding that if something doesn't resonate with me, I stop reading it, I stop watching it, I walk away from it. So if I'm looking at something, say on Facebook, and someone posts a video of something, I'll click on it and start to watch it. And if it doesn't resonate, I shut that shit off. I'm like, ew, no thank you. And I shut it off and I walk away. Simple as that. One of the things that I have been having and hearing folks say to Alex and I in regards to these videos, oh, you should consider making them only, tops 15 minutes in length. And that way you guys can, get more followers, because people don't want to watch anything more than for a few minutes. And for all of them, it's about gaining followers. And as Alex and I were talking about this, we are both coming from the same place, that this is not about us getting followers. This is about sharing what we are being shown and given, what we are receiving from Holy Spirit. We are extending and giving it away to our brothers. That is the knowledge and understanding of how I have gotten from point A to point B in my journey. How I have gone through the steps needed and necessary to look at these things, to have the truth of what I was doing shown to me, and have my body, mind, and spirit healed. My body of the physical ailments, my mind of the torment of the nightmares I was continuously having, and my spirit of the heartache and pain and suffering that I was imagining myself enduring. And so far, when I look at these other videos out there, not a single one of those folks are sharing in that way. None of them. Not Ken Wapnick, not Adi Ashanti, not Byron Katie, none of them. Not Marianne Williamson's. I have not heard a single one of them talk about how it has been working in their lives. Examples of how it has worked for them, and when they did the work, he showed them the truth of what they were doing. Seriously, folks, go watch their videos. Listen to the things they're saying. And if I'm wrong, please come back and correct me on this. Please. All my life, I pray to be wrong in these things that I have found to be true.
Why would you pray to be wrong? You've said that many times before, and it doesn't sit right with me.
I understand.
Who would pray to be wrong? Who wants to be wrong?
Because as a child, as I had said, the mind screw I kept dealing with was being absolutely correct and being told I was imagining it. And so when I would experience these things where I'm seeing the truth of someone's intent, I would sit there praying, God, please let me be wrong. Please let me be wrong. Please let me be wrong. I don't want this to happen. I don't want this to be true. Please let me be wrong. And every time I was absolutely freaking correct. I would end up getting beaten. I would end up getting raped. I would end up getting molested. Every fucking time. And I seriously was praying to be wrong every time.
You know, I have never heard anyone pray to be wrong.
Except for me.
Except for you.
Yeah. And it's like, what happens, honey, when someone sits there and argues with me? Oh, no, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And then I turn around and be right.
You get upset.
I get very upset. I get freaking angry. Because once again, I have been proven correct when they all kept telling me, you're wrong. And part of that, folks, is when that was happening, I was literally still trying to conform and believe other people's dictates. I had no trust, no faith and belief in what I was being shown, what I was perceiving. Because as that child, I learned to shut that shit down so I would stop getting beaten. And let me tell you, every time it would come back to haunt me. Instead of following my gut instinct, I did as everyone else was saying and doing. And when it came back to haunt me, I kept thinking to myself, why didn't I pay attention and do what I was first thinking? Because I would waver. I would waver and I would comply. And I would conform to whatever was being said to me. I must be wrong. I must be the one that's doing something wrong here. They're all right. They are always right. I am the only one that's ever wrong.
No, that sounds like me.
But that's what I would think too. Back then. That's exactly what I would think. You know, in this thing, it's talking about also about body appetites. And if you think about it, as teenagers, some of us that are being bullied have turned to food as a comfort, to escape. Others turn to drugs. Some turn to sex. Some turn to physical violence and other things. But they're all expressions of bodily existence, thinking that by doing this or doing that, you will comfort yourself.
They're all very similar types of comforts.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you eat food, your body gives off chemicals,
Pheromones.
chemical rewards, and makes you feel good.
Mm-hmm.
Which includes sex, which includes drugs, which includes
Endorphins.
even going out into nature. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's endorphins that you get, fresh air,
Mm-hmm.
sunlight, sound, sights. It's
Yeah,
it's all it's all endorphins that make you feel better.
exactly. But what it was talking about there was the abuses we do when we believe we're our body, that we need to do this, we need to do that to make us perfect, whether it's a surgery, working out incessantly.
Well, it doesn't use the word abuses. It says the ego regards the body as its home and tries to satisfy itself through the body.
Mm-hmm. So, well, in my mind, I see myself when I was overeating as abusing.
Right, but that's the label you're putting on
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Um, but it is a form of abuse. It's a self-abuse.
This abuse is a judgment.
Yes, it is a judgment,
Right.
Alex. It is a judgment of how I was perceiving myself in
Mm-hmm.
those times.
Okay.
Okay? And actually, it's not necessarily a judgment in this context, it's more of an observation that I was being abusive to myself in those moments, because the acts that I was doing are abusive in nature, because they were detrimental to my well-being, my mental, emotional, and physical well-being.
That's a judgment also, that it's detrimental. Somebody who is using drugs are using drugs as a coping mechanism to get by,
Mm-hmm.
to feel better. And so it would be a judgment to say, well, that's detrimental that he's using drugs, except that it's being used as a coping mechanism, which is the same as eating, which is the same as sex. So,
Mm-hmm. Well, I think me being up at 275 pounds was detrimental to my health.
except the course is saying that we
Mm-hmm.
are harmless. We cannot actually be harmed. So there's actually nothing we can do that's detrimental. The only thing that we can do is perpetuate the dream, the
Okay.
illusion of us being something that we are not.
Okay. I'm just going by what I'm being told here in regards to this,
Well, I'm
and
just
the example he was telling me to use.
right, but you're referring to the paragraph that does not say anything about abuses.
No, that was my choice of words, but you know what? You can take it up with Holy Spirit, because he's the only one that can explain to you why he was telling me to use it that way.
I just find it interesting that if I ever point something out that is
Mm-hmm.
not here in the text,
Mm-hmm.
and I point something out where I'm saying, well, that's your own, that's coming from you,
Yeah, and I agree
that's
with
your
you.
own judgment.
This is what I'm being shown to use as an example of things that are items that people do when they try to use their bodies as their way of getting happiness.
Right, that's the ego.
Yeah,
Right.
and that's what I'm trying to explain here.
Right.
And you're telling me that I'm wrong in my explanation.
No. I was simply clarifying that this paragraph does not use the word abuses.
I never said it did.
You said that's what this paragraph is talking about, the abuses.
Yes, that's what it's talking about. I'm not saying that it's using that word. That is what I'm trying to point out, Alex, is that it goes deeper than the surface.
Right. And I'm just pointing out that using the word abuses is a judgment that is not in that paragraph. That's all I was saying. It's okay to use the word.
Okay, but what I'm getting from you is that I'm wrong, I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I need to not use that word because I'm wrong.
No, I never said you were wrong. I'm just saying it
That's
doesn't.
what I'm getting from you.
No, I never said you were wrong. I'm just saying the paragraph does not use the word abuses, that's coming from you and your own judgment.
Okay, so what would you use as an example?
I'm not using an example. I'm just saying it doesn't say the word abuses.
Well, then please give me an example of something different to use in context.
I'm not giving examples.
I'm asking for you to give me an example in context to this so I can use something different. Please.
It's not my place to give you an example. I was simply pointing out that the word abuses is coming from you, and that's your own judgment.
Okay, that's fine. So then, if you have an issue with it, will you please give me a different example?
I don't have an issue with it. I was just pointing it out that it doesn't say that.
Okay.
That you were calling it abuses.
All right.
It simply says body appetites are not physical in origin. The ego regards the body as its home and tries to satisfy itself through the body.
Okay, so how does it do that?
Through eating, through drugs, through sex. But I'm not labeling them as abuses.
Okay. Any others?
Yeah, there's a million others.
Okay.
And we already discussed them.
Okay. All right, well, can you read the next paragraph, please?
Sure. The ego believes it is completely on its own, which is merely another way of describing how it thinks it originated. This is such a fearful state that it can only turn to other egos and try to unite with them in a feeble attempt at identification or attack them in an equally feeble show of strength. It is not free, however, to open the premise to question because the premise is its foundation. The ego is the mind's belief that it is completely on its own. The ego's ceaseless attempts to gain the spirit's acknowledgement and thus establish its own existence are useless. Spirit in its knowledge is unaware of the ego. It does not attack it. It merely cannot conceive of it at all. While the ego is equally unaware of spirit, it does perceive itself as being rejected by something greater than itself. This is why self-esteem in ego terms must be delusional. The creations of God do not create myths, although creative effort can be turned to mythology. It can do so, however, only under one condition. What it makes is then no longer creative. Myths are entirely perceptual, and so ambiguous in form and characteristically good and evil in nature that the most benevolent of them is not without fearful connotations.
It's like what I see it saying in that particular paragraph is that we are trying to constantly seek approval outside of ourselves.
Actually, the first sentence says the ego believes it is completely on its own.
I know. But what I keep getting from it is that we are constantly trying to seek approval outside of ourselves. So, what brings that thought into my mind is how it says the ego's ceaseless attempts to gain the spirit's acknowledgement and thus establish its own existence are useless. So we are constantly trying to seek approval outside of ourselves to say that we exist as we believe we exist. When we are asking other people for their judgments and opinions, we're trying to seek that approval. And it's the same with our spiritual endeavors. We are seeking the approval of the church.
Yeah. When I read the words in this paragraph, I think of Donald Trump.
Yeah. But that is basically what it's saying to me, is that it's that constant seeking for someone else's approval to tell us that we are worthy, that we are good, that we are this, we are that. So our ego can say, see, I'm such a good person. See, look at all the things I've done.
Yeah, the second sentence here in the paragraph, this is such a fearful state that it can only turn to other egos and try to unite with them in a feeble attempt at identification, or attack them in an equally feeble show of strength.
Exactly. So by giving their own judgments and opinions over, they are attacking in those moments. Yeah, with everything we seem to judge it, good or evil, right or wrong. And it's that kind of stuff that we've been taught to do, to judge and to seek out those judgments. All right, moving on. 9. Myths and magic are closely associated, since myths are usually related to ego origins and magic to the powers the ego ascribes to itself. Mythological systems generally include some account of the creation and associate this with its particular form of magic. The so-called battle for survival is only the ego's struggle to preserve itself and its interpretation of its own beginning. This beginning is usually associated with physical birth because it is hard to maintain that the ego existed before that point in time. The more religiously ego-oriented may believe that the soul existed before and will continue to exist after a temporary lapse into ego life. Some even believe that the soul will be punished for this lapse. However, salvation does not apply to spirit, which is not in danger and does not need to be salvaged. Okay, that just isn't making any sense to me. I'm reading it and it's not making any sense.
What I hear it saying is that ego or spirit is perfect, spirit cannot be harmed, and so therefore salvation does not apply to spirit, which is not in danger and does not need to be salvaged. So we don't really need to be saved. We don't need saving.
No, we don't need saving, because in truth we save ourselves when we go within and look at everything. You know, what's that one sentence here in this course? Something about how many teachers does it take to save the world? Only one. And we don't save the world. We accept the atonement for ourselves, the healing for ourselves, and extend it to our brothers, thereby saving the world. One soul at a time.
It says the so-called battle for survival is only the ego's struggle to preserve itself and its interpretation of its own beginning. So, in other words, we are not our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
We are not the ego. We are spirit. We are timeless. We are eternal. We're perfect. We're love. There is no sin in us. There is no death.
Yeah. Makes sense. Or paragraph, I should say.
Salvation is nothing more than right-mindedness, which is not the one-mindedness of the Holy Spirit, but which must be achieved before one-mindedness is restored. Right-mindedness leads to the next step automatically, because right perception is uniformly without attack, and therefore wrong-mindedness is obliterated. The ego cannot survive without judgment, and is laid aside accordingly. The mind then only has one direction in which it can move. Its direction is always automatic, because it cannot be but be dictated by the thought system to which it adheres.
So, as we start looking at all these things that he has us look at, and we start asking more and more for his correction, and choosing again and choosing differently this time, choosing to go with Holy Spirit's right-mindedness, we then learn to look out on our brothers and see when they are in those egoic moments without judgment. We just observe it, we see it, we understand where they're at. And in those moments, we're no longer judging or even willing to judge, even when we're being asked. Because we understand what it is that is being asked of us in those moments. That it is a wrong-minded egoic thought system or egoic way of thinking that they are asking us to help co-create.
What I'm getting from this is an example of somebody I know on Facebook who goes by the name of Lee Bwao, BWAO.
Mm.
And he always posts about how we're all one. And to have one-minded thinking would be to say to everyone, we're all one. But it's hard to lend a hand down to our brothers one rung below us. Well, they wouldn't be one rung below us. They'd be about 10. So,
I'm not understanding what you're talking about.
okay, so there's a concept that we're climbing a stairway to heaven or a ladder to
Okay.
heaven. And in order for us to help our brothers up the ladder, we cannot be too far up the ladder in order to help them. If we are too far up the ladder, then our brothers will not understand what we're saying, and what we say to them will not be helpful in any way, shape, or form. So this is a process of Jesus is in between us and Holy Spirit, and then there's God.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a process of helping a brother up the ladder, up the stairway to heaven. If you and I had one-minded thinking and we thought like Lee Bwao, we could not be helpful to our brothers below us on the ladder, because the distance would be too great.
Okay, I'm still not understanding what you're talking about.
Well, Jesus actually talks about this in the Course. And if you give me just a moment, I'll look it up where he actually mentions this. I think the words are
See,
too great.
well, there is something that I'm getting from Holy Spirit right now, and he is saying something about...
So here it is. No man cometh unto the Father but by me, does not mean that I am in any way separate or different from you except in time, and time does not really exist. The statement is more meaningful in terms of a vertical rather than a horizontal axis. You stand below me, and I stand below God. In the process of, quote, rising up, I am higher because without me, the distance between God and man would be too great for you to encompass. I bridge the distance as an elder brother to you on the one hand, and as a son of God on the other. My devotion to my brothers has placed me in charge of the sonship, in which I render complete because I share it. This may appear to contradict the statement, I and my Father are one, but there are two parts to the statement in recognition that the Father is greater.
Okay, and what lesson is that?
That's text, chapter 1, section 2.
Thank you. So yeah, that was one of the things we read way back in the beginning. What I was going to say before that Holy Spirit was trying to bring to my attention was a fear that I used to have. And it was a fear that Alex was going to wake up and go poof and be gone and leave me here in my hell and misery. And Holy Spirit disabused me of that notion. He said it's not possible for that to happen. That it isn't where one person goes and the rest stay. We will all go together or not at all. That is what he stated. We come all together or not at all. This isn't about somebody getting there first. I am no more awake than anyone else is. I'm not above you, I'm not below you. We are equals in every way. And that person you were mentioning, what I'm understanding is that they are thinking they are above somebody else. You are never above anybody else. You were always equal with everyone, is what I keep getting.
I don't get that from him. What I get is he sees us all as one, all equal as one.
That's not what I'm getting when you're talking about ladders and reaching down to help your brother up. That's giving an impression of them being above you, better than you, knowing more than you. And that's what I'm getting is not true.
In what I just read, he states that he is above us.
Jesus is,
yes.
But not my brothers here on this earth.
Jesus is our brother. And he is equal to us, yet he is above us on the ladder.
Yes, only Jesus. It doesn't say you are, or me, or anyone else. Only Jesus.
So you think that everyone in this world is just as spiritually enlightened as we are? You really believe that?
Yeah.
Yeah?
They have it in them, yes.
Okay, all right, you can believe that.
We are all equal.
Okay, you can believe that.
Just because they misperceive doesn't mean they don't have the knowledge in them.
Okay. So my dad thinks he's God, and he's just as equal, as spiritually enlightened as we are, even though he thinks he's God?
If that's what he chooses to believe, yes.
Okay, all right.
See, what I'm getting is we are all allowed to have our own beliefs. Everyone's path is different. So it isn't for me to tell your father that he's wrong and he's believing incorrectly, because that would be me trying to tell him that I know what's best.
Except that he is wrong. He's not God. He didn't create himself. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the misperceptions.
But I've never heard him tell me that he believes he created himself.
Well, then you didn't, that's because you weren't there in the
Okay.
conversations that I had with him.
Okay.
What I'm saying is we are all equal, yet we have different levels of misperception.
Okay. I would agree we're all at different levels of understanding.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
But we're still equal.
Yes, I never said we weren't equal.
Okay. All right. Do we have any more to give in on this particular paragraph?
I don't know. Do we?
All I know is that, third sentence there says the ego cannot survive without judgment and is laid aside accordingly. When I stop believing all the things I was taught to believe and I stopped enacting that crap on myself, I was able to lay those egoic beliefs aside. I no longer think of myself as being fat, of being ugly, of not being loved or undesirable. And I'm no longer seeking outside of myself for someone else to give me approval either. I don't need anybody else's approval. Because I don't need to ask for anyone else's judgments and opinions anymore. That was part of me learning to let go of those egoic beliefs, that I needed to continue asking others for judgment and opinion. All right, let's move on. It cannot be emphasized too often that correcting perception is merely a temporary expedient. It is necessary only because misperception is a block to knowledge, while accurate perception is a stepping stone towards it. The whole value of right perception lies in the inevitable realization that all perception is unnecessary. This removes the block entirely. You may ask, however, this is possible as long as you appear to be living in this world. That is a reasonable question. You must be careful, however, that you really understand it. Who is the you who are living in this world? Spirit is immortal, and immortality is a constant state. It is as true now as it ever was or ever will be, because it implies no change at all. It is not a continuum, nor is it understood by being compared to an opposite. Knowledge never involves comparisons. That is its main difference from everything else the mind can grasp. I think part of the thing here that is being misconstrued and misunderstood in the things that I'm talking about is that the ego will always compare. It will have you comparing yourself to everyone and everything around you, seeing yourself as better than, worse than, and never seeing you as being equal to everyone around you. And in Alex's example of being on the whole rung ladder thing, when I think of equality, I think of us all on the same level playing field, being no differences between us. We all have different levels of understanding of things, but we are still equal with the ability to tap into that knowledge that all of us have equally, because no one was left out in that. Everyone is absolutely equal in that way. God did not give me more gifts than he gave you, or vice versa. We have been given the gifts equally. And what I'm getting is that in that example you were using, it's not seeing our brothers as being equal, it's seeing us as being better or worse than them.
then you're saying Jesus is giving a example of better or worse,
I'm
because
just talking about what I'm experiencing with.
I just quoted from the book, from the course, what Jesus was saying. And he says, you stand below me and I stand below God.
Yes, and that is because he...
In the process of rising up, I am higher, because without me, the distance between God and man would be too great for you to encompass.
Exactly. The distance between us and God would be too difficult to encompass. Jesus is not here in physical form. He acts as a spiritual go-between.
He doesn't need to be here in spiritual form. If
In
a
physical
physical
form.
form. He doesn't need to be here
I
in
get
physical
that.
form.
But we are talking about dealing with people on a physical form level.
No, nothing is physical. Everything is in the mind.
I get
The
that,
outside
honey.
world is just a projection of an inward condition.
Yeah, but do these folks here watching this, do they get that yet? Because they haven't gotten to that point in the
Well,
course
they should
yet.
if everyone's all equal. I mean, using what you're saying, everyone should completely understand everything we're saying.
They have the ability to tap into that knowledge. It doesn't mean that they are yet.
Right,
That
exactly.
is the point.
Exactly.
Can we just agree to disagree on this and move on, please?
Okay, you can disagree with Jesus all you want. I'm reading from the course.
I understand.
And you're saying that my example of a ladder or
what I was trying
steps
to say that you keep cutting me
is a
off.
bad example, that we're all equal on some sort of flat level playing field, and we're not.
All I can tell you, dear, is what I have been getting shown by Holy Spirit, that I'm not to look at myself as being above anyone or below anyone.
Okay, then you can disagree with
Okay, so
what
I'm
Jesus
supposed to
wrote right
see
here.
myself as being better than you?
I didn't say better.
Higher up on the ladder than you?
Sure, you can.
No, I can't. That's an egoic judgment.
Okay, then you're saying that what Jesus is saying here is an egoic judgment.
Maybe it is. I don't know.
So you're saying
But
Jesus
then again,
is
keep
egoic.
in mind, you were just pointing out how someone else has edited this book, Alex. See, I'm not taking everything in here as being the absolute, because as you've already pointed out, there's been things added and removed.
Well, then
it's understanding and going to him, and I keep asking him for what it is that I'm hearing and being said.
Well, if I go by what you're saying, we might as well just stop right here and not teach anyone, because everyone's on an equal playing field, and there's nothing for us to teach anyone or truth to show anyone, because we're all on an equal playing field. No one has a lesser understanding than we do of anything.
This is why we're supposed to go within and take all of these questions to Holy Spirit.
I'm not asking questions. I'm reading the course here.
Yes,
and I'm reading what it's saying.
If you're having any issue with what I'm saying, then take it to Holy Spirit and ask him.
I'm not the one with the issue. You're the one that's arguing with what Jesus is saying here.
And you're the one telling me I'm wrong.
Yeah, you're wrong.
Then that's an egoic thought.
Okay. All right. Okay.
You're judging me in that.
And you're judging Jesus.
No, I'm not judging Jesus.
You're saying my analogy was incorrect, and I'm using the same analogy. Folks, this is what I'm talking about. I'm using the same analogy that Jesus is using here. I'll go on with what he's saying. I bridge the distance as an elder brother to you on the one hand, and as a son of God on the other. My devotion to my brothers has placed me in charge of the sonship, which I render complete.
Which is why you found that this area was a beautiful, wonderful place to live, and there was no violence or no gunshots and police sirens going on at all every day.
What does that have to do with anything?
Because it's the way you are using all of this as a stick to beat.
A stick to beat.
You know, everything that I'm looking at is like I take it into Holy Spirit and I ask him, what is it that you are saying here to me with this? What is it, the truth of what I'm perceiving being said? And when I'm giving an example of what he is saying to me as the truth of it is that no one's above me or below me. I'm not above or below anyone else. I'm equal with everyone. It's to see myself and my brothers and my brothers and myself. And what you're telling me is that According to this course, I am supposed to judge everyone as being less than me
No.
or better than me,
No.
and that
No.
I am to judge them continuously as not
No.
being good enough.
No. No, I'm not saying that all.
Because
At
that's how
all.
that comes across to me. And
Well, then
that's
you're
what I was.
misunderstanding what I'm saying and what
Okay,
I'm
well
reading.
then can we just move on to the lesson now, please?
Go
Because that is what you're saying to me.
No, it's not.
With what
No, it's
your
not.
interpretation
That's not
of it.
what I'm saying. That's how you're interpreting it. That's how you're interpreting what Jesus is saying, and that's how you're
Okay.
interpreting what I'm saying.
Then let's just move on, please.
Okay.
Because it's just getting asinine at this point.
Okay.
So,
You can
lesson
judge it as
33.
asinine.
There is another way of looking at the world. Today's idea is Today's idea is an attempt to recognize that you can shift your perception of the world in both its outer and inner aspects. A full 5 minutes should be devoted to the morning and evening applications. In these practice periods, the idea should be repeated as often as you find comfortable. Though unhurried applications are essential, alternate between surveying your outer and inner perceptions, but without an abrupt sense of shifting. Continue, please.
Merely glance casually around the world you perceive as outside yourself. Then close your eyes and survey your inner thoughts with equal casualness. Try to remain equally uninvolved in both and to maintain this detachment as you repeat the idea throughout the day.
The shorter exercise period should be as frequent as possible. Specific applications of today's idea should also be made immediately. When any situation arises which tempts you to become disturbed, for these applications say there is another way of looking at this. Remember to apply today's idea the instant you are aware of distress. It may be necessary to take a minute or so to sit quietly and repeat the idea to yourself several times. Closing your eyes will probably help in this form of application. So, look within, look without, and ask to see it all differently. That there is another way of looking at the world. Have a great day, folks. This was lesson 33. There's another way of looking at the world. Chapter 4, The Illusions of the Ego. The Ego and False Autonomy. Have a good day, folks. Enjoy. Bye.